Before we get to that, I just want to remind you of all the great content available over at BangTheBook.com. We have tons of stuff, man. We just have a lot of stuff going up day after day after day. Daily betting trends, daily picks, NHL from Parker Michaels, Monday, Wednesday, Friday from Doug Carson for the NBA. I do some how-to-bet pieces for Tuesday and Thursday. I'll have a ton of prop betting stuff coming out here over the next few days. I want to make sure that we had an idea that all of the books would be up. Westgate unveiling all theirs tonight out in Las Vegas. So, we'll start to see some more movement there on the prop market. So I was just waiting for that, and then I'll put some stuff up over there at the website. Our sportsbook reviews, so you can shop around for the best prices on those props and also, obviously, the game itself. Our free contest you can sign up for with an email address. You'll get cash prizes if you place in those. Our matchup data section, free pick videos with Brian Blessing, who you hear on Tuesdays here on Bang the Book Radio. So much going on. We are your one-stop shop for sports betting news and information. This and every edition of Bang the Book Radio presented by our friends over at DSI Sportsbook. If you sign up at DSI using that promo code BTB and the number 25, you get a $25 free bet just for signing up. 100% deposit match bonus for the sportsbook. 100% deposit match bonus for the live casino as well. At DSI, it's only a game until you bet it. Two guests joining me here on the program today. The first, Mr. Brad Powers from BradPowersSports.com. Brad, how's it going today, man?
It's going well. How are you doing on this fine Thursday morning?
I'm doing real well, bud. The first thing I got to ask you, man, I know we were talking off air before we started recording here. How's it going studying up on Justin Timberlake and Pink for those novelty props?
Man, it's a tough process. Really got to call my guys that might have some inside info on coming up this upcoming weekend in the practice rounds of those shows. So, yeah, the phone's been burning up here, calling with all that, trying to get some inside information. And I've said, forget college basketball, forget early prep on college football. I'm all about these novelty props.
I got to say, before we get too far into today's show, I hate Justin Timberlake. And I hate Justin Timberlake because I want to be Justin Timberlake. The dude is a solid actor. He can dance. He's a very talented artist. I mean, the list of women that he's been with is off the charts. Like, does this guy have a flaw?
No, probably not. I'm a fan too. I'm glad that they went with someone that's, pretty much universally liked. Bruno Mars, Justin Timberlake, people like that seem to have the best Super Bowl halftime shows. So, obviously I'll watch it. It's a big part of the draw of the Super Bowl is not necessarily the game itself, but I can see why you're a little jealous of a guy like Justin Timberlake. I won't go into it. Never mind.
We'll save that for off the air.
I was going to make a comment that might not have been appropriate for with all the great sponsors that you have there. I got to be a little more PC.
We'll save that one for the next time I'm out in Vegas, and I'm sure we can have some laughs about that. Before we talk Super Bowl 52, because it's something we've done all week here, just kind of seems like a thing. You and I have to talk college football at least for a couple minutes on every segment that you're on. Anything new? Anything you've been digging up here about the upcoming season?
Well, if you follow me on Twitter at BradPower7, I guess I'm old school. I don't like clicking around for each team for a schedule. I got every team's schedule for 2018, at least all the games that are announced currently. I tweeted that out, put it in a nice couple-page spreadsheet where you can just, at a glance, look at every single team's schedule for the upcoming season. It's not obviously gambling related, but at least it gets you a jump start on who's playing who and where. And let's face it, there's two main factors what you're looking at when you're trying to study teams in the off season. Who are you bringing back, and who are you playing and where you're playing? So if you follow me on Twitter, you can check that out. It's just free. It's just a 3-page with all 130 teams, all updated schedules, and I'll keep it updated as there's only a couple conferences left to announce their games.
Yeah, and that's a really important thing, especially when you talk about when you start looking at season win totals, because you want to come up with a projection for every game, an expected number of wins. You add that up together. That's how you get the number that you're looking at. And this is something we've talked about already and something I'm sure we'll continue to talk about as we get closer to the month of May when a lot of these numbers come out, is that from a season win total standpoint, like you said, it's great to know who's coming back, who they brought in with the new class, the coaches and coordinators and all that. But when you talk about season win totals and futures as well, who you play, where you play them, when you play them, all very significant. I mean, sometimes you can run into those letdown spots, those look-ahead spots. You want to factor those into your handicap for the season win totals.
No question, and it's important as anything. I mean, a great example, USC got a lot of love this past season, but, just looking at their schedule, didn't have a bye. They were the only Power 5 team in the entire country not to get a bye, and I wasn't buying all the talk as far as them being a national title contender for that reason. I thought they'd get wore down at some point in the season. That's exactly what happened, culminated by the blowout loss against Notre Dame. That's just one example of a schedule really factoring in to how a team performs throughout the course of the year.
All right, well, let's go to Super Bowl 52 here because I know we'll have plenty of time to talk college football, but I miss it already, and I know that obviously you do as well. But Super Bowl 52 coming up here February 4th. New England favored by 5. This is a number that hit 4.5 in the offshore market yesterday for a little while. As I'm looking at the odds screen right now, Heritage is at 4.5. They're the only book out there that I can see. I know this, or WagerWeb also at 4.5. I know that this is a number that's gone down to 4.5 at several shops there in Las Vegas, including what is supposedly a multi-million-dollar bet down at the MGM that has driven that number down to New England minus 4.5. What do you think about the activity that we've seen here so far in this game?
I'm not surprised the early money's been on Philadelphia. Let's face it, the Dogs have been quite good so far in the NFL playoffs, and that's not a surprise coming off the fact that after week 7 through week 16 or 17 in the NFL, you just blindly bet on the favorites, you're hitting close to 60%. So we're seeing some regression towards the mean with the Dogs cashing. Also, I mean, who looked really good in the conference championship game? Obviously, Philadelphia running up a 38-7 blowout win over Minnesota as a 3-point underdog. Their stock's never been higher, at least since Carson Wentz got injured. Their stock's way up. New England's stock way down. Here's a team that had to rally from a 20-10 deficit in the fourth quarter, and they look very vulnerable. Rob Gronkowski is banged up a little bit, so not surprised the early money coming in on the underdog. I mean, that was going to be probably the case anyway from the sharper bettors who prefer to probably bet the Dogs more than anything. And then when you add in the fact that two disparate results as far as impressive performances go in the conference championship games, not surprised the early money on Philadelphia, and I hope it continues to roll in because I think when it's all said and done, I think you're going to get a relatively cheap number on New England, and that's where I'll probably end up being on the game.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that there are a lot of different ways to bet the Super Bowl, and obviously we'll talk about props here in a couple of minutes, and props being the predominant one. I mean, we've talked about it already this week on the previous shows, and we will continue to hammer this point home. You want to have a position on the game because it's the Super Bowl, because you want something to talk about at the parties that you're at or whatever else. Me, I wind up walking in with like a list of 20 or 25 prop bets that I'm trying to follow as we go throughout the game, and that's because there's so much more value on those prop bets. There's so much more value in that less efficient market if you can pinpoint how you expect the game to go, or if you're using it as a pseudo hedge of the position that you've taken on the side or the total for the game. The prop bets are where it's at. But when you look at the game itself here, with this number sitting in a dead zone of 5, and I talked about this a little bit earlier in the week, what's fascinating to me is that if you take away home field advantage and put Philadelphia's 2 playoff games on a neutral field, they're probably a 6-point dog to Atlanta, 6-point dog to Minnesota. Why are they only a 5-point dog in the Super Bowl against New England? That's something that's been really interesting for me to look at, and interesting to hear some opinions on it as well.
Yeah, and it doesn't add up. I mean, you got to make the adjustment because Philadelphia covered the spread twice, but I'll put the caveat out there. I mean, Atlanta is 1 play away from winning that game and sending Philadelphia home. Obviously, there's been some reaction, and in my opinion, overreaction to Philadelphia's impressive performance. And, another thing that I'll throw out there, Carson Wentz, a lot of people, the consensus was he's worth about 6 or 7 points to the line. You factor that in, you're meaning to tell me Philadelphia, if Carson Wentz was playing here, would be favored over New England? I don't think that would be the case. I would have a strong opinion and bet on New England if they were catching points in this particular Super Bowl. So I think there is some line inflation on the Philadelphia side and a little bit overreaction to how good they looked against Minnesota. And you're exactly right. And you look at New England now, there were some injury concerns as far as Tom Brady's hand goes, but they were laying 7.5 at home against Jacksonville. You mean to tell me that you take the 3 or 4 points off of that they're laying how much better is Philadelphia than Jacksonville? I'm not sure that's necessarily the case here. So from what I've seen, Adam, I like to look and pounce on anything that's overreaction in the marketplace. And one thing that the Super Bowl does, even though it's supposed to be the sharpest number out there with a full season, with all the betting that's going on, it's the one time a year where, because, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, is there's over-analysis, paralysis by over-analysis, and a lot of times the media narrative gets it wrong, and a lot of times you can find some value in the Super Bowl just because everything that everyone's been talking about as far as the media aspect can be just dead wrong, or everyone follows it and creates a little bit mispricing in the marketplace.
See, and here's the problem that I'm having with this game is that the sharp bettors that are out there like yourself, I guess I'll consider myself somewhat sharp. We understand that. We have that view of the market where this looks like an overreaction because, as I said, there's no way that New England should be laying a lower number on a neutral than Atlanta or Minnesota. And yet, we're seeing the sharp involvement come in early on in this game on Philadelphia. So it kind of makes me wonder, is there something that I'm missing? Because you would think that this isn't really a number that sharp players need to run out there and grab. You're going to get steady streams of public money on New England. You'll probably get some sharp people that have a similar mindset to you and I about this game on New England. Why take Philadelphia at the 5.5? Maybe if you let this number just kind of sit there dormant, you could have picked off a 6, even if it was minus 120, something like that. And you could debate the merits of 5.5 minus 110 versus 6 minus 120, in a Super Bowl when New England doesn't really blow anybody out in the Super Bowl. But still, there's so many things about this game where I am kind of talking myself into that over-analysis or paralysis by over-analysis thing just because what I know about the markets, what I know about what sharp players like to do, what I know about overreaction, it's all kind of going head-to-head in this game, and we still have 9 days until the damn thing's actually played.
Yeah, and look, you like to follow the early money, but I mean, for the most part, and the limits are going to be the highest on this particular game than whatever we've seen. And I know there's been a big bet out there, at least at MGM so far. But, the limits only get higher as we go to the course of the week. So the real big players, I don't know if they've necessarily shown their hand. And let's be honest, if MGM just took a bet yesterday or the day before on Philadelphia, I'm anxious to know what that line was. Did they get 5, 5.5, that multi-million-dollar bet? Because if it was really, truly, really sharp, wouldn't they have taken 6 at the opener? Because, that's a not a very key number, but actually a secondary number to get 6 instead of a dead 5. So, a lot of people got a lot of money in deep pockets, but I'm not necessarily sure it's the sharpest of the sharp when it comes to the Super Bowl. So we'll see. And that's another thing that can cause a little bit of paralysis by over-analysis. You're going to see all these big bets and everything. And a lot of times, I don't know if it's necessarily the sharpest people in the world putting that kind of money down on a side or total in the Super Bowl when, the real big money should be probably out in place and spread around on maybe a college basketball game throughout the course of the week.
Yeah, and of course, you've got the Rob Gronkowski situation. We'll get some more clarity on that next week. But also, again, you've got 2 weeks for this game. This is very unique for the NFL in that, this doesn't happen. You get look-ahead lines for some of the marquee games, but you don't have an actual number sitting out there for 2 weeks at a time. This is a lot more like college football bowl season than it is like the NFL. So this number had a little bit of initial involvement. It should sit relatively dormant here, for a couple of days. Maybe it picks up over the weekend. And then certainly on game week, as limits get higher, we'll start to see more and more investment in it. But, Brad, when you consider what happened in both college football and the NFL this year in terms of line moves, heavy game day money, heavy movement, lots of involvement from respected bettors out there in the marketplace, pushing those numbers around, kind of makes me wonder, what we actually see with this line next week. Do we see that sharp position be New England? Do we see that sharp position be Philadelphia? And when does it happen? Because on game day, some of it can be obscured a little bit by the vast amount of public money being bet on this game. Does it come in earlier than that? I really don't know. This is a really difficult situation for me. I feel like I had a better grasp on several of the previous Super Bowls that we've had than this one.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do where the line's at right now. It's a little unpredictable because it's such at a dead 5. You expect it probably to move because the 5's a dead number. It's just, the question is it going to 6? I don't know if that's going to be the case. In fact, I pretty much doubt that. Or is it going to go to 4? And, boy, if you're wanting to bet Philadelphia, obviously 5 being a dead number is not that important, but I sure as heck wouldn't want to get +4 when I could have gotten 5. So that's a great question. Now, we've seen early sharp involvement on a lot of these bowl games, early week and all that throughout the course of the season, but you're exactly right. There's been just as much late day, game day line movement that to me, I've had to reconsider. A lot of times I like to get ahead of the market, but I've been surprised, a couple lines each week, the way they're moving, and it hasn't necessarily been, correct. It's not like something that's been hitting at a 55% clip, the late day, game day line movement. And sometimes I think the public, because it's getting, more and more commonplace for people to get down bets, maybe the public has a little bit more influence on the marketplace, particularly on game day, than what we've seen here in recent years, because, gambling and sports gambling is becoming more and more prominent. And, just even here in the state of Nevada, it's a heck of a lot easier for the public to take advantage because they can bet from the friendly confines of their living room on a lot of these sports, on a lot of these apps that become more and more popular with each passing year. So it doesn't physically take them. They have to drive to the casino and make a bet on the game. That's all things we got to reconsider moving forward. But I would love to have you, clear-cut answer. This is where the line's going to go for the Super Bowl. I just don't. I think, Rob Gronkowski, if that injury clears up, you would expect the line to be maybe moving a half point in New England's favor. But, we also seen New England Super Bowls, and we could talk about that a little bit. It doesn't matter what the line is. The New England Super Bowls are basically decided on the final possession by 3 to 4 points.
Yeah, and of course, the biggest margin of victory for New England in a Super Bowl was last year. They won by 6 because they scored a walk-off touchdown in overtime, and they were down 28-3 in that game. So, for New England, as dominant as they've been against the spread, as much of a dynasty as this has really been for Belichick and Brady, they're finding ways in the Super Bowl. And, that's what good teams do. They find ways to win, especially when they're not at their best. But they're not going out there and dominating anybody. They're not blowing out teams in the Super Bowl. And realistically speaking, you shouldn't blow out your opponent in the Super Bowl because that's supposed to be the best team in the opposite conference. So we'll really have to wait and see what happens with this line. It is a very perplexing situation for me right now, especially sitting in a dead zone where, any kind of involvement will swing the balance of this number because 5 is not a key number. We're not holding on to a key number of 3 like we were trying to do last year in the Super Bowl. We're at 5. 5 means virtually nothing. So it doesn't take a whole lot to swing the balance of this number, and I'll be really interested to see what happens as we head into next week. But, Brad, I think, one of the things that makes prop betting so attractive here is that you're basically just betting against the sports books and other sharper bettors that are out there. When you talk about the game itself, you're betting against the entire world, and that makes it very, very challenging. So I like to take a focus on the prop bets, and we will cover a ton of them next week on the show. We'll get some of the prop best bets from our guests as we go throughout next week on Bang the Book Radio. But for now, Brad, let's talk in some general terms here about how you sort of formulate a plan, how you narrow your focus, because we're talking about 300, 400 prop bets out there.
Yeah, and one thing that I like to eliminate, and this eliminates probably 25 to 30% of the prop bets, stuff I don't even handicap, is I don't try to take a stab at who's going to be the MVP of the game because those odds just aren't correlated to success. You could bet on all the options that they give you, and you'd actually lose money. It's really set up against you. I don't like doing that because, let's face it, the true odds of, like a Deion Lewis, I've seen like 12 to 1. He'd be named the MVP. The true odds of him being the MVP are probably more like 20 to 25 to 1. So I really don't take part in a lot of those type of MVP odds or who will score the first touchdown. It's not in my forte. What I do think there's some value is the type of prop bets that there's a clear defined cut, whether it be, this happens, yes, this happens, no, where you can bet both sides of the action as far as the actual bet. You can either bet on it to happen or bet on it not, or passing yards, over or under. Typical type of bets, like those type of prop bets, is what I normally take place on, and there's a lot of value. And one thing I will say, one of the difference between sharps and squares is sharps aren't afraid to bet a lot to win a little, where squares are always looking to bet a little to win a lot. And those props that are, betting a little to win a lot, I just don't. It's not in my forte as far as betting them. I'm not afraid to lay, minus 500 to win 100. And let's talk about two of the bigger prop bets that have been made so far this Super Bowl. You look at the South Point; they offered up a couple props on Sunday night, and one guy came in, bet no safety, minus 700. He laid $14,000. He's feeling that's a free $2,000 for him, and he also laid $15,000 on no overtime at minus 750. Also thinking that that's a free couple G's there, because there's only been one overtime in the history of the Super Bowl, and that being last year. So I would say, if you got a little bit of a bigger bankroll, don't be afraid to bet a little bit more on some of those ones where the probabilities. I mean, the probability of no overtime is probably more like 15-1 that there won't be, instead of minus 750.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and that's one of the things that Brian Leonard talked about on yesterday's show, is that if you're going through your prop catalog, you want to see more minus signs. You want to be paying more juice than you want to see plus signs, just because, as you mentioned, I mean, the true odds are very skewed for these types of things, and sportsbooks know that, and they also know that they need to find a way to get a pretty decent handle out of these props, just in case there's something like a safety, which we saw, 2 years ago in the Super Bowl. Last year, we saw a defensive touchdown. I think we've seen a defensive touchdown or a special teams touchdown in 6 of the last 8. Yes is always plus money in that situation, and it's come through, 75% of the time here over the last 8 Super Bowls. So, the books have lost some money on those types of things. The game going to overtime last year. So, they want to make sure that they're getting the right kind of handle to assume some of that kind of loss. And the way in which you do that is you don't deal out true odds on a lot of these things, and you really shade some of them, significantly. So that's kind of what you're talking about there in terms of, the MVP, the first touchdown, those types of things, not true odds. And if you are going to play them, I know that people do enjoy playing them, so I don't want to discourage anybody from, throwing some fun money on them, but make it that. Make it fun money. You do not want to put, your standard unit size for a college basketball game or an NFL game or something like that on any of those, multiple option props like the MVP, like the first touchdown, stuff like that. You just don't want to do it. They're too high variance. And that's why, like you said, if you're getting the over-unders, the yes and no's, those are things you can bet with a little bit more confidence.
Yeah, you can. And let's talk about things that have happened. Actually, the safety happened 3 consecutive years in the Super Bowl. I mean, that's an unbelievable. And people start to see that. They see big money as far as that. Defense special teams touchdown, yeah, there was value on it 10 years ago in the Super Bowl, but since the books have taken a beating on it in 6 of the last 8 years, they've adjusted accordingly on those odds. There might have been value, way back in the day on that, but now you're getting not nearly as big as a payout. I mean, for example, it's like plus 145 in some places right now, where 10 years ago it might have been plus 180, plus 200. So there's been a lot of value gone in the marketplace. Another key thing that I want to bring out as far as betting Super Bowl props is, when you're looking at defensive special teams touchdowns and all those different, safeties and all that, you're exactly right. Not necessarily a reflection of the true odds of that game. And, what are the true odds of that? I mean, and how do you look at it? Just don't look at Super Bowls. Actually look at what happens during the course of a regular season. And I think a lot of people make that mistake as far as, they look and see what's happened in the last 4 or 5 Super Bowls and whether or not these things have cashed, when the reality is you should be looking at an overall general regular season and what the percentages are of those things happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people remember these things from the Super Bowl, but they are outliers. And in terms of, the season as a whole, I think I looked at it for the national championship game. I think in every college football game there were 49 safeties out of the entire season worth of data. And I think it was like minus 800 for no safety in the national championship game. And if you've got the bankroll means to play something like that, there were 49 safeties in every college football game. you probably aren't getting one in Alabama versus Georgia. And, of course, as you know, we wound up not getting one. We also didn't get a defensive or special teams touchdown in that game either. So, we'll just have to wait and see what happens with these props and what happens with the juice on them as well. But, the one thing I would really recommend to our listeners, and Brad, I know you know this, is that, you want to shop around for the best lines. If you can take under 44.5 yards instead of, under 42.5 yards, it may seem marginal. It may not seem like much, but those 2 yards could really wind up coming into play. If you can lay minus 175 instead of minus 195, that's very significant. And in some cases, and it's very, very hard to find some of these, if you're shopping around, you can find some arbitrage where you can free roll basically, and have a spot where you have basically like a free bet on no, a little bit of plus money on yes. If you're looking around for those things, you can find them. They're rarer now than they used to be, but they are out there if you really do your digging.
They absolutely are. And let's use a great example from last week's prop betting in the AFC Championship game. Very popular prop bet was Leonard Fournette's rushing yards. And the thinking behind it was Bill Belichick, what does he do best? He takes what you do on the opposing side, your strength, he likes to take it away. And a lot of people were betting the under on Leonard Fournette's rushing yards. I can tell you here in Vegas, you could find anywhere from 74 rushing yards for Leonard Fournette up to, I saw 82.5 at Bookmaker with some extra juice laid on that. What does Leonard Fournette rush for in the game? I think 76 yards. So depending on what line you got, the fact of shopping around, had the actual value there. If you shopped around, got the best of it, you had a winning ticket, and you just took whatever was given to you, you might have had a loser with that, and that's very important. And the problem that a lot of people have is specifically on game day, I would say if you're flying into Vegas for the Super Bowl, I'd bet these props when you arrive to Vegas. Don't wait until Super Bowl, and you got to wait through the lines. And I see so many people not shopping around, and they're ticked off because they got to wait in a half-hour, 40-minute line to get a bet down on the game. And I'm exaggerating as far as the wait here, but a lot of times during the course of the game, that's what you'll be waiting. I would take the time during the course of a day, whether it be Friday or Saturday of the Super Bowl, shop around, get your bets in a day early, and get yourself the best of the numbers. Because if you're waiting until Super Bowl Sunday, you're going to be waiting in lines, and a lot of times you're not going to be wanting. And the strip's going to be very busy for you not to be shopping around. Get the best of the lines. You can increase your win percentage significantly.
Yeah, I was actually out there for, Super Bowl 45 in 2011, Green Bay and Pittsburgh, and I was at the Superbook there at Westgate, and I wanted to put in a second-half play, and the line was, I don't know how many people that are listening have been out there to Westgate, but the line was it was back up the steps, almost, it was back past the Players Club desk, and I was like, yep, all right, the hell with this, I'm good. I just took my phone out and made my play. When I had made my play offshore, because what else are you going to do? I'm not going to stand there in that line. And even with the elongated halftime show, I still don't know if I was going to make it to the window, and that was with every window open. So again, make sure that you are smart about it in terms of setting up shop for where you want to go, and then getting down on the action that you want to get down on. Brad, let's chat college basketball here for a couple of minutes just to finish things up for our segment today. I know that you were a little bit late to the college basketball game because you were so focused on college football. How are things going so far? Is there anything that you've really picked up on that's been a good edge for you?
Yeah, one thing I'll say, and I'm gonna take this moving forward, and I think it's a great piece of advice as far as January goes. Probably not moving forward as we get more and more towards conference season, but I also think it comes back into play come March Madness is, the differential between strength of schedule, because it's the one unique sport where there's two different thought philosophies when it comes to non-conference scheduling. A lot of teams like loading up, impress the committee when it comes to Selection Sunday, or they just want to test out and see how good their team is. They play a very tough non-conference schedule. So, and then the flip side of that, you get a lot of teams that, want to get some confidence, boost up their wins and get some easy W's, and they play a relatively weak schedule. And it's unique in the fact that the non-conference schedule pretty much represents 35 to 40% of your overall schedule. And when you hit January, and you hit the first couple of games of conference play, and a lot of times even the first 5-6 games of conference play, you can get these strength of schedule disparities where one team's sitting there at 6-6, 6-7, but they played a top 50 schedule, and they're taking on a team that's maybe 12-1, but they've faced, and played the number 300 schedule in the country. And a lot of time there's value, because what happens in the month of January, just from the general betting public, is as soon as the bowl games are over, what are people going to be betting? Obviously, they're still going to be betting the NFL, but they start to take a look at college basketball. And if you put your thinking cap on in the minds of some of these public bettors, a lot of them are just going to look at straight up record. You mean to tell me an 11-1 team's an underdog to a 6-7 team? That just doesn't make sense to me. I'm going to go ahead and bet on the 11-1 team, and a lot of times you get an extra half point or point of value just from looking at disparity between strength of schedule. I think that's my number one factor in January when you're handicapping college basketball, because it's that unique time where you can get that, where a majority of the games have been played have been non-conference, and you can get those disparities. Now, moving into February, those strength of schedules tighten up because you're playing the same teams in your conference. But it flips in, and not just the NCAA tournament, but we're talking the NIT, the CBI, the CIT. Then it comes back into play, your strength of schedule, and a lot of times you can get some extra value in the month of March.
Yeah, I know that was something you touched on last week's show as well, and I'm glad you did it again here this week, because it is a really important point to drive home, and especially when you talk about the fact that, as I mentioned at the top of the segment here, we have 2 weeks between the conference championships and the Super Bowl, and people are itchy, man. They got those itchy fingers ready to submit those bets, and they're just out there throwing action around to have action, and that can be very dangerous for you here in college basketball if you're not paying attention to those strength of schedule metrics, seeing why some of these teams have the records that they do have. So it's an excellent point there from you. What about Thursday night's card here? Anything that you're looking at? Any sort of best bet you want to throw out for our listeners?
Yeah, you know what? I'll throw out two. I'll throw out a lean. I just think Michigan's going to be confident against Purdue. I mean, they should have beaten Purdue outright in the game that these two teams played about 2 weeks ago. They're catching double digits. The early money has come in on Michigan in this one. It's dropped. You can still shop around. Boy, I see an outlier at the Wind having 11.5 right now. But the overall market has Michigan a plus 10. Here's a team that shouldn't be afraid of Purdue. Not only that game, but it's also a Michigan team that went on the road to East Lansing a couple weeks ago and beat the Spartans outright. I kind of like Michigan, top 20 defense for them, catching double digits there. I do lean with Michigan, but my favorite one right now, as I'm analyzing the card, I love the fade against this Arizona State team. You look at them, they started off the season 12-0. They were probably the biggest surprise of college basketball. They're in the top 5 of the AP poll. They pull off the big upset at Kansas. Well, since then, they haven't covered a single spread. They're 0-5-2 against the number. They have won a couple of games straight up, but here's a very overrated team. And if you look at the top 40 teams in the country, they have the worst defense as far as adjusted D in the KenPom rating. So it's tough laying a lot of points with a bad defense. And Utah has owned this series 11-0-1 against the spread the last 12 meetings. Give me the Utah Utes plus the 8.
Brad Powers from BradPowersSports.com. What's going on over at the website right now, man?
Yeah, right now on the website, BradPowersSports.com, you can download all past issues of my football newsletter, number 1 in the country, last 3 years combined NFL and college football. You want to get locked and loaded for the Super Bowl, you can do so for $49. Now, I know that sounds pretty pricey for one game, but it's just not one game. It's the early price not only for this year's Super Bowl, but for all. That's right, all of next season, both NFL and college football. Weekly newsletter. It's the lowest price you'll see. That price of $49 does expire on Super Bowl Sunday. Get yourself in early. Get yourself not only for the season win totals, where I send it out monthly during the course of the offseason, but also get yourself covered all the way through next year's Super Bowl. $49, BradPowerSports.com.
And I got to say, that newsletter that you do is an absolute work of art, man. You've got the picks in there. You've got write-ups on all kinds of other sorts of games. That thing is a very, very valuable resource for our listeners out there. So I'd certainly encourage you to check that out over at BradPowerSports.com and follow him on Twitter at BradPowers and the number 7. Brad, appreciate your time, brother. We'll talk to you again next week.
All right. Take care, my friend.